Thursday morning, and a number of things are happening in the news. I actually had the pleasure yesterday of hanging around with some local newsmakers, at least they're newsmakers in the sense of preservation and the preservation of our historical institutions and all along those lines. So, Preservation North Carolina was giving away some awards on yesterday. I think that was Preservation North Carolina, or maybe it was Preservation Durham, but they were honoring people from throughout the state that were doing some very important work in that preservation lane, including folks that were doing the Gear Street Elementary. I think there was a school called Andor, or a area called Andor, and they were being honored, and a number of other people that were doing work in that space, including one that currently lives in Wake Forest, but had done some work with Fort Liberty, which is what Fort Bragg is now called, and all along those lines. So that was great to see that folks are actually dealing with historical areas and trying to make sure that those historical areas are protected and all along those lines. It is a 3-day conference, and it actually started on yesterday and is going on through today. And I think that they're going to visit some of the historical areas here, such as Paulie Murray's house and some things in Hillsborough, as well as around Raleigh, and a number of other things. And even Nick might know about some of the things in this sense of modernist homes, because that was one of the things that they were going to be talking about, as well as the preservation of our coastal areas and a number of other issues as well. Because, like I said, they were definitely honoring people from the state and all in that kind of line. So it was a good event. Got to meet some of the people that are in that space and got to learn a little bit about them. And hopefully, we'll be bringing some of them here onto Pod TV to share their concerns and some of the things that they are working with and all in that line. So that's just a little bit about what was going on in my day yesterday. But let me tell you about what's happening in the news and all in that way. So, Dianne Feinstein, the longtime California senator, is to be remembered at her funeral service. So, that is definitely going on, and mourners are paying respects to Senator Dianne Feinstein at the San Francisco City Hall. So, that is something that is going on as we remember that legendary senator and all in that kind of space. On a sadder note, a wife of Bob Menendez um, killed a man in a car accident. So, Democratic Senator Menendez's wife hit and killed a pedestrian while driving in 2018. So, this is something that is coming up in that whole Menendez case and all along those lines. So, we'll see how this all plays out on the political landscape and the political stories that go on in that way. A dramatic video is showing a plane moments before it crashed into a Oregon home. So I can only imagine what that would be like, waking up to a plane landing in your house and everything. So that can't not be a great thing. And actually, it was very tragic for one of the people, because definitely there was somebody that died in that crash. As a matter of fact, two died in that crash, as a matter of fact. So that was definitely a sad incident. And of course, a lot of people are talking about what is going on with Kevin McCarthy and that ouster as the House Speaker. And some people are saying that this could be very detrimental to the Republican Party, as apparently Kevin McCarthy was one of the best fundraisers that they had. And he was definitely very good at getting out there and raising money for a number of the candidates in that space. So we're going to see whether this plays out, that he doesn't do as much fundraising and they lose something in that space, or maybe they'll find somebody that can replace him, because apparently he was very good at that aspect of politics. But I'd be curious to see what Lee Rhodes and others have to say about that when I get them on here as well. Um, Presidential debates without Trump are becoming an RNC headache. And I do know that there have been some calls. I think Trump called for there not to be any more debates whatsoever. And I also believe that Vivek was trying to say that it would only be the top four that would be in those debates. So that is something else that is going on. And speaking of Trump, he is calling the business fraud trial a disgrace, as accountant is over there testifying, and a number of other things are going on in that trial. And apparently, some folks are saying that he was grumpy, but that he left the trial on the third day of his fraud trial and all in that kind of space. So we'll see what happens. And apparently, the Biden administration is bypassing 26 federal laws to build additional border walls over there around that area in South Texas. So apparently, he's waiving 26 federal laws to allow those border walls to be under constructions. And Trump says Biden sees the country being invaded and warns of terrorists already inside the United States. And of course, we're in the middle of that Kaiser Permanente strike as more than 75,000 healthcare workers began that strike, and no bargaining sessions are scheduled as day one of the Kaiser strike closes. So already the patients over there in California are seeing delays in services amid that strike. So it is one of the ones that is one of the largest, I think, in the healthcare industry, and it's definitely hurting a already ailing U.S. healthcare system. So definitely, we'll see what goes on in that way. Uh, Apparently, there is a winner in the estimated $1.2 billion Powerball jackpot. So they've definitely getting out some winning numbers, but maybe there isn't a winner because I'm trying to find out if they actually have announced a person that won, but they gave winning numbers. And now we'll see if anybody comes forth with those winning numbers at all in that case. But as I'm looking, it looks like maybe not, because it looks like 3 Texans take home millions from the Powerball, but the jackpot will keep growing. So it looks like maybe we'll get up to 1.4 or 1.5 in that space. Going to see if Lee Newton Rhodes is going to buy a ticket. Like I said, sometimes when it gets up to that kind of money, you can't resist the temptation. And I bought one, even though we just learned I apparently did not win. So that's some sad news, but hey, that's the way things go, and all in that way. Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan are running for the U.S. Speaker as the GOP race to replace McCarthy is heating up. So we're going to see if one of these gentlemen is the one that is going to get it or not. And at one of our HBCUs, there was a shooting that was going on, that being Morgan State, and that was actually doing their homecoming. So multiple people were shot at Morgan State doing their homecoming, and definitely that is something that is going on as well. And of course, there's a number of conversations around what we can do with the gun violence, not just here in the United States, but around the world, and all in that kind of a way. But we'll see what folks have to say about that also. And speaking of things that are going on that get some support and some not support, the U.S. public support is apparently declining for the arming Ukraine, according to a poll from Reuters and Ipsos. So they are saying that folks are not wanting to give as much aid as they used to, and that support is declining. So hopefully, Biden is wanting to keep U.S. aid flowing to Ukraine, even though there is definitely some chaos that is also going on in the House as well. So that's just some of the things that I am seeing in the news. We'll get to some of the world issues, and then, of course, I'll bring up our distinguished panel and see what they've got to say about a number of the things that I have been talking about, and all in that kind of way. By the way, there was a Russian attack in Kharkov and that region, and apparently it killed 49, according to reports coming out of Ukraine. And definitely, even Zelensky says that almost 50 were killed as Russia bombed a grocery store. So that is something that was going on in that war and in that kind of way and everything. And I'm trying to see if there are other things that are happening out of that area, even though I'm sure that definitely Sasha will have some thoughts about things that are going on in that area. As a matter of fact, they're saying Russia saw the biggest drone assault on its own territory, and Ukrainian officials say a Russian attack on a village cafe also killed 48 people as well. So definitely that is something that we are seeing. And Russia is claiming that it foiled a major Ukraine drone attack as concern are growing over Kiev's weapon supplies there in Russia, and Ukraine saying that it hit Russia's treasured S-400 air defense on its own soil. So that is something that we are seeing. And apparently Zelensky told Europe Russia will attack others if Ukraine loses. So he is definitely warning that the attack may not just stay there in Ukraine, but that it might even be going on in other parts of the world as well. And speaking of other parts of the world, there is a attack that was going on in Iran, and apparently an Iranian girl is in critical condition after an alleged encounter with the morality police over there. So she's actually in a coma, and there are definitely people that are wondering about their rules there, as apparently she was attacked after not wearing a headscarf. And we do know that those kind of rules are very much enforced in a lot of the Middle Eastern countries and all in that space. And Pakistan is ordering 1.7 million Afghan asylum seekers out of the country by November. And Amnesty International is asking Pakistan to instead keep hosting Afghans, as their expulsion may put them at risk. So that is something that we are seeing in that space. So they are also dealing with a situation with refugees and immigrants and people that are trying to escape something that they feel to be untenable in their life and all along those lines. And speaking of that, a record 400,000 US bound migrants are trekking through the dangerous Darien jungle. So that is something that is going on because they're trying to reach the US, and apparently a record number are risking their lives to cross that treacherous part of the world. So that is something else that I was seeing. And apparently, Earth is on track for its hottest year yet, according to a European climate agency. So definitely, we are talking about the weather, and apparently, 2023 is on track to be the hottest year on record. So who knows? We might even see some hot temperatures in these winter months. And speaking of things that are climate related, apparently a glacial lake burst in India, leaving 100 missing and 14 dead. So that is something that is going on in that part of the world with things that are dealing with the climate and weather and all in that kind of way. So, like I said, that's a bunch of things that are going on in the world that I've shared, and I'm sure others will have other things that they will want to share as well. So I'm going to try to get to them and see what we've got going on. We've got Debbie Peterson with us, which is always a good person to have with us. And we've also got Lee Newton Rhodes and all in that kind of way. And of course, I think we've got a number of others as well. Maybe even Shaquille might join us because Shaquille's coming at us from Australia, even though as a world traveler, there's no telling where he's at on this particular time and everything. I guess the first thing I'll start off with you, Diane, is how are things going there in California? And I know that a lot of people are honoring the legacy of Dianne Feinstein, and you were actually involved in the California politics. So if you have any thoughts around of the former congressman and all congresswoman and all in that space, and want to share your thoughts on her as the funeral is going on today. And I'm thinking that you might have even had some pleasures of working with her, or maybe even some personal insight, but I don't know that for a fact. But if you want to share with our audience your thoughts, I would love to hear them.
Yeah, I was one of those people who believed that she needed to step down because she had become incompetent. And I know that folks felt there was a lot of talk about it was something she loved doing. It's what she did. But, sometimes there's a time where if we are serving the public, our best service is to leave. And I'm really sad that she left the way she did, of course. And I was really intrigued. Her legacy is amazing. And I did not ever have the chance to meet her personally, because I think really by the time I came on the scene in 2004, she really wasn't making any local appearances by then. So I never had the privilege of meeting her. I can't say she was ever one of my favorites, but I don't have a lot of favorites.
Understood and appreciate that. That makes a lot of sense. A lot of things going on in politics. And speaking of things going on in politics, I don't know if either you or Lee have any thoughts about this, and I'll bring in Sasha Starr as well. But it does seem quite interesting what was going on with the whole nature of Kevin McCarthy and what is happening on the political landscape, because I did not realize that he was as big of a fundraiser as apparently he was, but apparently he was a big time fundraiser, and people are wondering if that might not hurt the Republican Party if he decides not to be as active. And I'm not saying he won't be as active, but he may take some kind of like offense at the way he was ousted, and maybe he won't be as active, or he may just decide that the bigger picture is a greater concern and continue to be active. But I did see some people that were wondering if he was still going to be active, and if he is active, in what role, or whether they're going to have to find another big time fundraiser, because apparently he was a major fundraiser for the Republican Party. But I don't know if you had any thoughts, Debbie, as you've been involved
Well,
in
I wanted to add, of course, he is a Californian, and isn't it interesting? We have someone on both ends of the extreme there in California. We've got a pretty far right and a pretty far left, and I guess that's true of the whole country. Just wanted to add that. I have met Kevin McCarthy, and that was probably 15 years ago. And at the time, I was really impressed with his legacy as a businessman. That attracted me. I've since, of course, become lean. I lean more on the Feinstein side, and I've been less impressed with him. But I just wanted to add that he is a Californian. And I think we're going to have a new term now. I think now we're going to have a term that instead of giving someone a thumbs up, you give them a McCarthy.
Yeah, that could be a possibility and everything. And it's just going to be interesting to see who steps into his place. I know that apparently one of our own, meaning Patrick McHenry, who is from North Carolina and all in that kind of space, was the interim person. And apparently he rushed to oust Nancy Pelosi office, or to get her office, because he wanted that office. So there was kind of some of that office politics that exists both in mainstream corporations as well as in nonprofits and other organizations where there are offices to be had and everything. So I was wondering if folks had any thoughts about that, because apparently in the midst of all this, and even while they are laying Dianne Feinstein to rest, that there was some efforts to try to get to this prize office, because maybe the office is in a prime location. I don't know where the office is actually located, but any thoughts? And I'm glad we've also got Shaquille, because it definitely seems like the House and the whole Senate is in a state of upheaval, at least for the moment.
And
well, look, I'll just say from a non-American perspective, first of all, apparently I met Dianne Feinstein at an airport. And I'll be honest with you, I had no idea who she was, because I wasn't really that interested in American politics at the time. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until somebody told me afterwards, like, oh, yeah, that lady that you spoke to for a couple of minutes, that was, that was Dianne Feinstein. I was like, cool. Who's that? I had absolutely no idea who she was. And I think it was sort of a bit later, but I sort of Googled her. And so, yeah, I either met her or I certainly met somebody that looked like her, but it wasn't, it's not like I spent any time with her, so I can't say anything about her. But obviously it's very sad for the country, I suppose, to lose somebody who's had such a great legacy, regardless of whether you agree with her politics or not. But, yeah, I would say, from my perspective, I think that politicians do have to think about, and their parties have to think about, their age, their mental abilities and things like that. And, maybe it would have been better if she'd have left politics a little earlier and not in this way. The same thing could be said about, some others. Mitch McConnell, there's a lot of talk now about him, but, potentially having some health issues. But even with the election of our good friend from Pennsylvania, do we want someone like that in the Senate, given that he's got all these issues? There's a balancing act. You don't want to hold a disability against somebody, but I think we have to get that right. Just on the political side of things, Australia has had a very tumultuous time in politics since I've been an adult. It's fairly stable before I became an adult, so maybe it's my fault. I came of age and the country fell apart. I don't know. But we've had, because in Australia, the political parties actually nominate who their leader's going to be, and so they can actually change leadership while the government's in place. So, we've had this string of prime ministers and a whole heap of different opposition leaders, and all this sort of instability that's occurred. And I think that's quite frustrating. We've also seen a lot of games being played by political parties over who the speaker is, because in Australia and the UK, the speaker is normally somebody from that party who's actually in the House of Representatives. So what that means is you actually lose a vote. So if it's a very close margin, somebody's got a siren in the background, so it's sort of cutting in on the sound. If you've actually got a very close margin, then that you might need that vote. And so we've seen a lot of games like that. When I look at what's happening in the United States, I would think that whatever political games are being played in Washington, D.C., I can't imagine that the majority of Americans on either side of the aisle are particularly impressed with this. You've got 45 days to sort out, to sort stuff out before the potential government shutdown. And, we're playing these sorts of games. I also think it makes Republicans look really bad. If Republicans, really want to go out there in the next election and say, look, we're the party of stability, we're the party that's going to manage the economy really well, we're going to do all these, great things, slow and steady, and then they're playing these games, it's not a good look for them. And I think that would hurt their chances. If I was American, I would be somewhat questioning whether I'd be wanting to vote for a party if this is how they're going to behave. So I think that would be damaging to them.
Shaquille, do you think parties should present single issue bills as opposed to packaging tons of unrelated things together?
So this is an interesting question for me to answer, Lee, because I'm not used to seeing it outside of the United States. So my automatic reaction would be yes, I think they should be single issues. But also I think that every issue should actually be read onto the House floor before it's voted on, and should also be read into the Senate before it's voted on.
Since we all agree on that, Debbie, myself,
and I think, but I'll sort of just go a step further. I think it should be discussed line by line, because I think there's a real level of unfairness when regulations or legislation is passed without any real explanation as to why things were passed. And then if there's a challenge, it's left to courts to try to work out what the legislative intent was. That just doesn't make sense to me. And then to say to the citizenry, well, you have to abide by these laws, but we ourselves don't even know what they are. That seems really unfair. I mean, if you are a person who's taken a case all the way through to the Supreme Court and you got a 5-4 decision, you don't just normally go to the Supreme Court, right? Normally something has happened at a state level. Then you've gone to the state appeals court, the state Supreme Court, then a federal appeals court. Then finally you've managed to get yourself to the Supreme Court. And what would happen in that circumstance, if you've got a 5-4 decision, is that the Supreme Court is overruling something on the law 5-4. That would imply that all the judges and all the lawyers and prosecutors and like everybody else that has been involved in the case were wrong on their interpretation of the law. But you have to abide by the law because ignorance often is no defense. I mean, that you can't live like that. I mean, it's an unfair way, in my opinion, for the government to behave towards the citizens.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Hey, Shaquille, just quickly, and this is for everybody here, and I'm actually going to get to another news story, even though I'm going to get to one that I did mention earlier. But how much, and I've said on this show and other shows before that while I am not active overly in the religious community, I did go to a Jesuit university and all in that kind of way. But how much should we put out there, and how much should our quote unquote moral leaders, whether it's moral leaders here in the Christian right or whether it's people like Pope Francis, take on social issues and issues of the political front? Because I saw recently that apparently Pope Francis is taking on climate deniers and is saying that it is irresponsible, some of the things that the U.S. is doing on the climate change, and he's even making a comparison between the U.S. and China. So I was just wondering, how much should we be listening to these world leaders that are religious leaders, but also may take political stances or social issue stances and all in that kind of way? I'm just wondering folks' thoughts around that, because he apparently has been very active. I think he even had some active stances going on.
I won't comment specifically on the Pope, because obviously I attend things in the Vatican, but I will say that I think that religious leaders should be cautious about getting involved in politics. I don't think, for example, if you're a Catholic, which I'm not, but if you are a Catholic, it's not as though your Catholicism is going to lead you to become a Democrat or to become a Republican. And so if you start taking a political position that potentially could be divisive, you're sort of representing a religious group, and I think that that's something that you ought to be very careful about doing. I think, look, if you're going to be advocating for things like, charitable tax treatment and, things like that, secession of the church and freedom of religion and all those sorts of things, I think that's reasonable. But when you start to get involved in other issues, I think that you have to be very careful about doing that. And the Anglican Church, which is the church that I'm most closely aligned with, or the Church of England in the UK, has recently started to get involved in the LGBTQ sort of trans debate by stating that they were going to stop having a reference to gender when it comes to God. And that to me doesn't seem like a very good idea. I think you should just stay out of it.
Shaquille?
Well, in that same lines, and I want to hear from you as well, Lee, but I want to say it was either yesterday or maybe a couple of days ago, the Pope also said that there might be some ways that same-sex unions could be blessed and all along those lines. And I think that has become a divisive point within some of the Catholic Church and all along those lines. But I don't know if you've heard something similar, Lee.
Well, the thing that I've heard him say is that it shouldn't be illegal. It shouldn't be a crime. I don't think he went so far as to say it could be blessed. In fact, he actually was quite specific in saying that they still consider it to be a sin, but it shouldn't be a crime. And I think personally, especially amongst younger people who are religious, that still is the view amongst the majority that, look, we may not agree with something, but we should let people live their lives how they see fit. Within reason, make sure that it doesn't negatively impact everybody else, but people should be able to live their life how they see fit. And I think that that's really probably the position that he's trying to express. But again, really, I think that all religious organizations should try to stay away from the contentious issues of the day.
Shaquille, do I understand you correctly? You're saying clergy should stick to scripture and not current events?
Well, I'm not saying they shouldn't speak about current events at all, because obviously that's something that's going to be talked about within churches and congregations. But I'm saying that I don't think it's a good idea to take a position on something. I don't think, for example, it's a good idea if there's a comment that climate change deniers are, terrible people. I don't think that's a very good idea, because a lot of people who don't like what's happening in relation to climate change and the agenda, it's not that they have a problem with more environmentally friendly energy production. It's that they have a problem with what's being proposed. Maybe we shouldn't put solar panels.
No, and that's fair. So I think what you're saying is what I'm hearing.
So when they take a position, you can end up ostracizing a big group of people, and that's not a good idea when you have church numbers and numbers of people going to mosques and synagogues as well. Those major religious groups are falling in attendance dramatically, and so I think that starting to take political positions is just not a good idea for a religious organization.
And just really quickly, just so I can just
clarify,
because apparently he did just say that and everything, just in case you didn't know that, Shaquille. But yeah, Pope Francis was asked by a group of his cardinals for clarity on that issue in terms of same-sex, and he did say that he would be open to the having the Catholic Church bless same-sex couples. So he did open that can of worms and did say that he would be open to that conversation and to those couples actually being blessed in the within the Catholic Church. And like I said, there has been some pushback from within the Catholic Church to that statement, but he did.
Yeah, well, it's certainly a matter for the Vatican leaders to work out. But I would suggest that the traditional Catholics, especially in more traditional countries like Italy, for example, are not going to take very well to that. So again, that's why you really don't want to get involved in things like that. Let the congregation tell you, rather than doing it the other way around. But then again, look, we're talking about the Catholic Church here, and hey, not everybody had access to a Bible until such time as Bibles were freely available, and then you had this Reformation and Protestant movement as a result. So, or partially as a result of people actually being able to read Scripture for themselves. So I'm not going to get involved in church politics more than that, other than to say what I've already said, that I think they all ought to be very careful about getting involved in politics. And I say the same thing about charities and other organizations. If you're an organization that's like the Sierra Club, stay out of politics. Just stick to the topic that you're about.
No, that makes a lot of sense. By the way, one of the other issues I was going to get to, and I don't know if folks have thoughts around this, but I know that there has always been conversation around this wall. It actually came up on the debate with Vivek, talking about how folks could literally go underneath the wall with the tunnels that apparently are already there and everything. But now it appears that Biden is saying that a further wall, or at least a more strengthened wall needs to be built, because apparently he has given some money to actually strengthen and add some miles to said wall and everything. So I just wondering, is this a good look for the Democratic Party, or is this something that is that political lane that we talk about, where he's playing to the politics of what's going on and trying to win some votes in that space? Because I was, some people will say that this is probably a complete turnaround from some of his past stances, and I'm not saying whether it is or isn't, but I was just wondering to our panel if they have any thoughts around this notion of continuing the building of the wall.
It's a complete turnaround. He's even waiving, federal law in this also.
Are the Mexicans
EPA laws
going to pay for it?
What was your question, Diane?
Debbie wants to know who's going to pay for it. Mexico?
I actually, when you see literally the hordes of people coming through, and you realize that the border towns are not wealthy towns, partly because of that, partly because they do absorb a lot of immigrants. At least it's the first port of call. I have a lot of sympathy with that. I think it's reasonable. It is a reasonable response. And I think it's a response that almost any nation would take, including the nations that welcome immigrants. And in fact, we do welcome immigrants. Our score on accepting people from other countries is not bad at all. Our scorecard's reasonable on that.
Debbie, is there any nation that welcomes immigrants unlimited?
Oh yeah, not unlimited. That's right. Yeah, I'm not saying unlimited. That's the
right.
whole
No,
point.
I agree. Right.
Yeah.
But that's what we've been doing.
I don't think so, but it's interesting. I think it's Dubai has 85% of their population is not native born, and they have a huge immigration rate. But it's countries that actually recognize that they need usually a larger workforce.
Debbie, those 85%, can they become Dubai citizens?
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah.
It's very typical. It's almost impossible to become naturalized as a citizen of the UAE. But back to this core point, though, Debbie, about needing a workforce. And sure, the Middle East has imported people. Saudi is doing that at the moment, especially building the line. Look, I understand that, and I'm a massive beneficiary of immigration policies in Australia. My family have benefited amazingly from immigration policies in the United States, especially where they've started to live, which is California and Vancouver predominantly in the US. But I think that we have to talk about immigration in Western countries. So most of Europe as well is affected by this. Australia, New Zealand, and obviously bigger countries like the United States are affected by this in a way that can actually be quite unfair to some immigrants, because they're not able to jump the queue, or they get pushed back in the queue, or some of the things that are being said in America, like the Dreamers, well, they've been here for such a long period of time, it's not fair to send them back, which I agree with, it's not. But it's also not fair on the same token to say to the child who didn't have the benefit of American education because their families obeyed the laws that, look, you don't really qualify right now, and so you can stay in that country that you're from. I think getting this balancing act right is going to be very difficult, but unfortunately we're seeing it become politicized, and we forget the humanity side of this. We often forget about the human trafficking victims. We often forget about what happens to a lot of these very young boys and girls and how they're treated, and how trapped they are. And I think that's a really big problem. We've seen that around the Western world. We've seen an increase in violence, and we are seeing a massive change in demographics as a result as well. So again, it shouldn't be purely political, but I think every country who is wanting to admit immigrants has to be able to vet those immigrants and make sure that they are the right types of people. And to be fair to the Biden administration, I think that they are trying to do that. But we're talking, at the moment, 10, 11, 12 million people that have come in. That's like half the population of Australia. I mean, that is such a significant number of people. From what I understand, it's more than the population of most of the states in the US. So I think there's a little bit of unfairness from the federal government to put the obligations to pay for all of these social services back onto the states when the states are saying we can't handle it. For states like New York.
Yeah, Shaquille, along those same lines, and like I said, I don't know some of these regions, but I can only imagine what they would be like. But if people are trekking through a dangerous jungle, this seems like it would be almost like the underground railroad to the umpteenth power if you're trekking through those kind of atmospheres, because we know the history of what they happened here and what people had to go through. But I can't see that it would be as similar to going through these jungles, because I imagine these jungles are very treacherous, and apparently that's what 400,000 of the migrants are going through, because they want to get to a better life and everything. And like I said, I know nothing about the Darien jungles other than they are jungles and all in that space, but I imagine that it is not a safe passage that they are going through, and I imagine it's very
Well,
treacherous.
but specifically in relation to what's happening in the United States, I think it ought to be acknowledged that the West is making poorer those already poor countries. Those people that are walking and putting themselves through that are obviously coming from really bad conditions. Of course, this then flips back into that same question. Well, what do we in the West do? Because if governments do go into those countries and try to help, they get told, well, we're not in the business of nation building, but you're in the business of what? Cleaning up the mess? I think these issues are really complicated, and you know, we need to have politicians stop with their sound bites, stop with their quick lines, and actually have proper conversations discussing the issues and trying to formulate potential solutions that could work and try everything that we can. Nick.
I agree with you, but Shaquille, along those same lines, and I think that
I actually have an idea, okay, because I was
Yes.
thinking about this. And here's one of the solutions. We hire the migrants that are coming in. We pay them the U.S. minimum wage, which is disgusting, $7.25 an hour, but they're desperate, they'll work. And we hire them to build the Trump wall, okay? Since half of them, or 40%, are coming from Venezuela, then, and Trump always said, let's Mexico pay for it. Mexico isn't the one who's causing the trouble. They're just conduit. We go to Venezuela. We seize 40% of the oil fields like Chavez did, the communist dictator who caused all this problem. Pump the oil out. Things bought, paid for, U.S. government walks away clean. All right? So now we've taken care of the problem. We built the wall.
And how exactly are you going to keep the unions happy when those union jobs aren't there that would have otherwise been building the wall? How are you going to deal with that?
Build a wall down in Texas. But listen, you get 400,000 people from Venezuela who want jobs. They will build that wall for you, and we'll get it done at a minimal cost. But it's going to cost something. Mexico isn't going to pay for it. They don't have oil money. Venezuela does. 40% are coming from Venezuela. Then we go back and we take it from Venezuela. Case closed. You've taken care of the problem. But see, that would be an innovative solution that people in Washington.
Well, if you're gonna do that, why not just go down to Venezuela and overthrow their government? If you're so powerful, there's nothing that can stop you from doing that. Why not just go down there and do that and steal their oil?
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. Nick and Shaquille, hold on a second, because that's actually going to get to something else that I was getting ready to ask
So
and
what
everything.
you need to do is you need to have the Venezuelans build the bloody wall, which they'll be more than happy to do. By the way, once the country is stabilized, they're going to go back to Venezuela anyway. They have no.
Well, we're hearing Republicans and Fox News complaining about the threat on the northern border. So. Look, the issue isn't just the southern border. The issue is how you're processing people who seek asylum and are trying to seek admission to the US.
Shaquille, hold on a second. Nick, back up. I got to hear from Shaquille. What's going on the northern border? Because, like I said, that's Canada where it's not here. So, is there a threat to people coming from the northern border as well?
As I understood the report, and I wasn't watching it for very long, but as I understood from the report, the complaint now is that not everybody is trying to cross by walking across the southern border, that people are trying to enter through Canada, and that the Canadian-US border is not quite as scrutinized, so it's easier to come in from. Now, I frequently enter the US from Canada because I have family in Canada, and then I have family in Washington State, so I sort of drive down and catch up with people along the way. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think the issue isn't just about building a wall on the southern border. The issue is going to be, well, how do you actually process all the people? So in Australia, we have the same issue, except we're a waterlogged country. So we have what they call boat people. And we had this signed about 15, 20 years ago at the airports. I don't know why they were at the airports, but they said if you come to Australia by boat, you will not be allowed to stay. Which I thought was an interesting thing for the Australian government to say, considering that England got here by boat, but I won't get into that. But the policy has been that if somebody tries to seek asylum in Australia, they're actually shipped off to a neighbouring island, such as Nauru or other places like that. And we have gotten the ire of the international community, but arguably we have reduced the amount of people that have sought entry by boat. So is that the right solution? Is it the wrong solution? I don't know. I don't know how to address this, but I think that the wealthiest countries, the most powerful countries in the world that are arguably the most desirable to live in, need to address this on a worldwide basis, and what we're going to do with the people that have been displaced.
There's another solution, is that what we do is we hold a contest, and what we do is we ask for submissions for the people around the United States to submit their ideas to solve the border problem. Now realize now you're drawing from a demographic of 330 million, which 3 million are going to be pretty smart people, and the top 30,000 are going to be smarter than anybody in Washington, D.C. And now you get proposals from the best and the brightest, and not the idiots in Washington, D.C., to solve the border problem. Let me tell you something, Shaquille. You're going to get some really good proposals because there's really smart people out there. Some of these technology guys are just unbelievably smart. Your smart people are not in Washington, D.C., but they're the big egos, but definitely not the big brains. But once you hold this contest, then, and I would say, hey, you could have the people in Congress hold a hearing, but we know that now you got dumb people making more dumb decisions. Go to the smart people, let them make a decision.
Hold on a second, because I'm thinking one of their solutions, and I could be wrong, but I've talked to a number of those people in that technocratic and smart people lane and everything. And I mentioned one of the solutions, and maybe Shaquille might agree with me, he might disagree with me, but a lot of them love this notion of alternative universes, metaverses, and things of that nature. So I'm thinking that one of their solutions will be, don't worry about going to the US, we'll just create a US for you in the metaverse, and it'll be wonderful, and you can actually live there where you are, but live there in the metaverse.
The problem, Mark, with all that stuff is they're starving. In other words, the metaverse does not feed you. The last time I saw, it feeds Mark Zuckerberg, but doesn't feed people. The real problem that they're having, because they're so corrupt down there, is that in Latin America, is a lot of the people are starving, and when they're starving, they're going to do anything to get out of the situation. But the thing is, we have a lot of smart people in the United States. They are not in Washington, D.C. If you put proposals there, then all of a sudden you're going to see some good proposals. Then you have a committee that reviews their proposals.
I think Nick is living in a self-created metaverse. You actually believe that the politicians of any country, but especially yours in Washington, D.C., are going to put out a proposal or try to listen to the proposals of the people? Since when have politicians been listening to the people? What are you talking about?
That's because they're idiots. Okay, smart people listen to smart people. Smart people try to find smarter people to listen to. Idiots think they're the smart people. Okay, and we already know.
Well, how about, I have a better solution. How about we elect smart people with integrity?
I don't think that's happening because Debbie, I would think that would happen, but after following politics for quite some time, and if you did a what you believe is empirical or correct analysis, and this should be the right choice. This was the one that won the debate. But then you find the average person who votes will vote for the average person who basically gives a middle school mentality. Listen, if it was all smart people voting, Trump wouldn't even be a part of the picture. He'd be gone a long time ago.
Hey, Nick and Debbie, hold on a second. Nick, I hear what you're saying, Nick and Debbie.
That's
Nick and Debbie, just a real quick thing that I was going to add to what you just said, Debbie, because like I said, that's what I opened with. I had the pleasure of dealing with some folks that are in the preservationist space, and I know that even Shaquille has done some work with folks in the preservationist space as well. Matter of fact, I think one of them might have been in North Carolina, if I remember correctly, but Shaquille can correct me if I am wrong on that and everything. But one of the things that one of the recipients said is actually that word that you just used, which is one that I know that Lee talks about as well, which she was honoring her legacy and the legacy that she had of a 30-year career, where she was urging others, because there were some young people there, to have integrity in what they do, and even integrity in their decisions, even in decisions around whether to protect a historical monument or not protect a historical monument, because there's a lot of that conversation that goes on as well in the preservation community. But just this notion of integrity, isn't that something that we don't have enough discussion of just in the world society? Because like I said, as I was sitting there and I was actually in control of the lights at that particular event, and she mentioned integrity, I started thinking about our conversations here in this space and on Pod TV, and how most of us, and all of us, as far as I'm concerned, have a great deal of integrity, and it's very important for us. But I sometimes think that it gets lost in the greater conversation. So I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm wondering if we are even teaching integrity in our school system, or the
what's your definition of integrity, though? I mean, the issue for a lot of people is that well-minded, well-reasoned people of good moral character have different perspective on things. You take the criticism of California in relation to the very high property prices. One of the criticisms is the lack of building permits, the slowness and the bureaucracy involved in that, and the fact that they don't want certain developments to actually occur. Now, why is that? Well, I know I was actually I won't say who, but it was a very, very high-profile government leader in Australia that I was sitting with for a period of time today at the airport. And actually, there's a number of them that we were seeing there. We're discussing the housing shortage that we have in Australia and the fact that there's unaffordable housing. And I made the comment to them, I don't really understand what people want, because if the states were to release more land and they were to make housing more affordable, making housing more affordable is another way of saying that housing prices would fall. The majority of homeowners are not going to want their home prices to fall. This is why people in California will vote against those types of things. And it's not just California, there's other places like that as well. Florida is going to end up being like this because of the amount of wealth that's moved down to Florida. So when people say, well, I want more affordable housing, and they've got other people saying, well, hang on, I've invested my life savings in investment properties and things like that, and this is my nest egg, so I don't want you to do anything which is going to lower the demand. Both of those people are perfectly reasonable, moral people. They both have just different ideas on what's going to help them. And I don't think either of them are wrong. But what happens is politicians tend to, not in person politicians generally seem to be pretty okay, but collectively they seem to just get together and then drive a wedge between people who would otherwise probably be able to come up with a sensible solution to these issues. And that's the great failure about this.
Speaking of sensible solutions, here's one that I've heard. I've even heard it proposed on this network and other things, and I think it's reasonable and sensible and everything, is there are a number of buildings. You can go to North Carolina, you can go to California, you can go to a number of places that are basically sitting empty there, or they are not at maximum capacity and everything. So wouldn't it be reasonable to convert those buildings into housing units and all along those lines? I think there have been some proposals around California, but
it's the same. But it's the same thing, Mark. Like the new developments, California tried to have a rule, and Debbie, you can obviously speak on this more than I can, but they had a proposal for a period of time, and I think it was up around San Francisco, but I'm not 100% sure, where if you're building a new apartment building, you would have to have, a certain amount of apartments, which would be low-cost apartments. Mm-hmm. And Californians voted that down. They were really incensed about it, saying, how can you expect me to pay $2 million for an apartment, and then you've got somebody who's living in there for $300,000. Like, how is that going to work? We shouldn't have that. So again, these things are complicated. It's not just because of pure selfishness. It's because people are obviously trying to improve their lives as much as possible. Again, I think these issues are complicated. One of the things that you could do is you could actually create things like special tax incentives, which is often government's way of dealing with things in order to try to create the housing. But I don't think that you can just sit there and blame certain people for it.
California has been doing those kinds of things for as long as I can remember, certainly since 2004. And they're doing more and more and more all the time. And they are dictating, interestingly enough, planning is in the hands of the cities and communities that it's in, but the state is dictating a whole lot of things. We must be allowed to build additional dwelling units, provided there's room on our lots. It was for a while we were allowed to build a second home. Now it's even less restrictive, and there are always concessions for people who make a certain number of affordable units. They get parking concessions, they get all kinds of concessions. So those things are happening in California, and there really isn't an issue of not in my backyard so much, because we have such a low stock of housing that no matter how much extra housing we put in, we're never going to catch up. So it's not going to harm anybody if we, for us to do that. In fact, it helps most of us because most people are struggling. Our middle class is shrinking. We all need some help.
Yeah, I hear you
Yeah,
on that.
but unfortunately, Debbie, the middle class is under pressure in places like New York and California because of the success of California and New York. And that's why I'm saying with Florida, they're going to find themselves in the same thing because Florida has had this big rush of investment into it. Whatever success is going to happen in Florida is going to cause a lot of pressure for the middle class. And I get it that people can't live as easily as they were able to in the same areas that you could 20 or 30 years ago. But the alternative, which seems to be proposed by some people, is that they should make it harder for the wealthy to get wealthy in the first place. And I think that that's a balancing act. You don't want to make the state less successful, but you also have to acknowledge that you need a workforce to support that state. And it needs to be affordable. The fact that you've got people that actually have full-time jobs and can't find somewhere to live in some of the big cities in the United States and now here in Australia, this is a problem, and we have to address it. But I don't think it's just as simple as a short slogan.
No, but Shaquille, it's not just the big city. Because one of the other things that I've seen happen, and I think it's happened here in North Carolina, and actually Pepper alluded to it yesterday, is that if you are having the jobs in the big city and the growth is happening in the big city, and then you have to grow and go to live further out, you don't always have the same kind of amenities in those other areas. So like if you were to go to like say Wake Forest or which is a town here in this area, or well actually Wake Forest is fairly affluent, but you go to some of the other areas that aren't as affluent, it's difficult to get to the areas that are where the better traction is and where the better successes are, because you are pushed out. I mean, that's one of the conversations that even took place in the minority community, is that they were pushed out far into the country and everything, and they didn't always have the amenities in the areas that they were pushed out to. So that was part of the conversation.
We have that problem in my county. There are 275,000 people. Our county seat has about 50,000, maybe 60,000 people. And we can't attract doctors, partly because we're classed as rural, so that we don't get any of the benefits that cities get. But our costs are just as high. We have very high housing costs, one of the highest in the country.
And that's one of the things I was getting ready to say in that area and everything. I know we're getting ready to wind down, and I know definitely had some great conversation here. I was going to bring up just one other issue within that space, and this could probably be a whole show in and of itself, but it's one that I know Shaquille has talked about, and I'd love to hear folks' thoughts about this. But how much is the U.S. or should the U.S. be the kind of moral police? Because definitely that was one of the other conversations, because apparently even there in Iran, a woman is definitely dealing with breaking the laws there and all in that space, and she is facing I think she's in a coma because of what took place and all along those lines. But should we be trying to interfere in those countries that have some very strict rules? And of course those are strict Muslim rules, but they can be strict rules of all sorts, because we were talking about the Christian communities. And I was just wondering if folks had thoughts about that, because that is something that has been put out in the news, where folks are wondering about some of the rules that exist in those Middle Eastern countries that can be very repressive. And I'll just leave it at that and everything. But I was wondering if folks had thoughts around whether we should be getting involved in their political landscape.
What's the purpose of the United Nations? Isn't that the purpose? To have some standards on humanity, human rights?
Yeah.
But the United Nations doesn't have its own military. So
I get
if we
that.
need to intervene, it has to come from our countries, and especially the Five Eyes nations and Western Europe. We're the ones that have to do it. I think that yes, we have a moral duty to the rest of humanity to actually interfere, because if we don't, then what are we saying? That we stand for human rights, but if you come to us and ask us for help, we're not going to. We either stand for this stuff or we don't.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and everything. And a lot of people are wondering that, because there's been a number of things that have seemed to be very repressive and all in that space. And like I said, this is one where the lady was not wearing the headscarf. And we do know that there are some very strict rules around clothing in some of the more fundamentalist Middle Eastern countries and all along those lines.
No, but to Shaquille's point, we can't, every time we see something that we don't approve of, start a war with the country. If they tell us to, get lost, we'll do what we want.
Well, it's not just about causing a war. The United States has criticised Australia. Australia has criticised the United States for certain things, right? Like Guantanamo Bay was something that
at the end
we.
of the day, how do you enforce
Well, we're not
anything?
going to go. Well, there was some changes made to how the United States interacted with Australia on certain issues, but we talk as nations amongst each other. But if we're going to have this human rights, Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other charters, and then we're not prepared to do anything when countries break them, then what's the point? And by the way, if we just slightly pivot away to climate change, one of the things that I hear a lot is people saying to me that we must do something because of the massive displacement that's going to occur to the poorest people in the poorest countries on earth. So here we are spending potentially trillions of dollars to try to address that issue, but we're not prepared to spend trillions of dollars to deal with issues to do with, the sexual exploitation of children, the labor exploitation of people around the world, the exploitation of women, the brutal way that women are treated in many parts of the world. We're not prepared to do anything about some of the abuses of gay and lesbian people in other countries. We're just going to sit there and turn a blind eye to that. Or when those people ask us for help, we're not going to help them. But then when they come to the border of the United States, we say, come on in. These things shouldn't have happened to you. I mean, at the end of the day, we either are prepared to back our morality that we try to encourage other countries to have, or we're not. And I get what you're saying, Lee, like what's the immediate benefit to the United States? Well, what I would say is that by us actually being prepared to spend our money and use our political influence and our diplomatic influence, as well as some military intervention when necessary, by us being prepared to do that, the long-term costs is probably going to be less than if we don't do it at all and we're stuck having to clean up the mess later.
No, I get that, but who's to say the United States is right on a particular issue?
Well, who's to say any of us are right? But we have collectively over time, over all of human history, reached certain points and certain consensus over what's acceptable and what's not. And at the heart of it is human liberty. And that's why most countries on earth have some form or are liberal democracies and have some form of a mixed system between a capitalist economy and socialized public services. That's exactly why we've created that type of a system. And absent there being another system that we can find, this has been as close to perfect as we've ever been able to find. Now, I know there's a lot of contention, a lot of division amongst our countries, but this is the best quality of life that humans have ever had in Western countries. But at the same time, there are people out there who have high infant mortality rates. And just there's so many issues affecting the third world.
So what do we do as Americans then when someone knocks on our door and say they don't approve of the way we're doing on position on X? We tell them it's off, or do we?
But depending on what the criticism is, the United States should look at it. When China criticised the United States for its treatment of especially black people, the United States was embarrassed, right? When Australia and the UK and New Zealand criticised the United States over what was happening in Guantanamo Bay, the United States was in some way embarrassed about that. When the United States military was using cluster bombs alongside Australian service people who were ordered not to ever use them because it's against our rules, there was some level of friction between us. So countries will work together to achieve these goals that we all supposedly stand for.
Okay.
Can I jump in? I wanted to let folks know, sort of along those lines, last week we had a guest, Dr. Regina Griego, and she's the one whose nephew killed his family. And I had done a podcast with her that I hadn't put up yet. So that's up now on Corruption Chronicles. And I just wanted to let everybody know that because it's a fascinating podcast. She speaks very openly about a really tough topic about, I think, patricide, kids killing families. So that is up on my podcast, Corruption Chronicles. And I've listed it for you guys too in the chat. And it's called Sins of the Systems, which is the name of the book.
I bought the book. I'm still reading through it. It's kind of a fascinating story. And it's like you can see where things go wrong. But then, gosh, there's a lot of possibilities where things can go wrong that don't go that bad at the end of the day. But then there's some things like that was really horrific. And it's an interesting story. I mean, an interesting problem that we just... Again, another situation that we don't address very well in this country, the mental health issues. But what gets me is with a country of 330 million people, and a lot of smart people. You saw what these people did that won the Nobel Prize. The ability to put a computer together on one of these things, which is incredible. You would figure that some of these social problems could also be solved by these bright people if we were allowed to access them. So now I'm going to take my swipe at Dianne Feinstein. She was in office way too long. What happens, and this is what they say in football, Jimmy Johnson used to say that, look, I got 5 years, I can turn a program around. And after 5 years, there's really no more I can give to it. So he retired from football. He goes, I could do 5 years in that. The problem we have with politicians is they get addicted to the power. It's like it must be some juice there they've got to have. And they refuse to turn over the power to a younger generation. And we're seeing it right now with Trump and Biden. These people have power addictions that are just incredible. I don't like either one of them, because if they were really good people, and neither one are, they would be grooming younger people to take their position. Not being octogenarians and saying, I'm just really upset because I am very happy to right now transfer $26 million US for Mar-a-Lago. I would be more than happy to buy that right now, but apparently he won't sell it to me, so I don't know. Okay, wait. He wants $740 million, but that's fraud.
But that's not that. Apparently, that's not what the valuation is, according to New York. So, Lee, you're in New York. Can you see if I can get Mar-a-Lago for $26 million?
I think we should be very careful when we have politicians telling businessmen what the properties are worth and not letting the marketplace determine it.
That is one of the craziest lawsuits I've ever seen, because all rich people, all of them that I've worked with for 40 years, overvalue their properties, even their brain.
All people overvalue. Almost all people.
Right. But then when they go see the tax man, they all go, oh, it's not worth very much. Okay, it's always down. And
well, no, hang on a second.
Something here about overvaluation.
What?
Obviously, each property has asking price and it has a bid price. So there is always whether you are buying or selling or so on. But when you are selling that your apartment, which is on documents, is 11,000 square feet. Now, you put in documents that it's 35,000 square feet. It's a fraud.
No,
That's a lie.
Not that easy.
Fraud.
Not
It's
that
not
easy.
a question of
Not that
valuation.
easy.
It's outright lying.
Sasha.
It's a
Okay.
fraud.
No. You gotta listen to
Sasha, you know how accountants and politicians speak. This is not a fraud. It was just within the margin of error. It was only triple the size.
It's an opinion.
So
It's not just speaking to the square feet, not to the price. There's a big difference. You can measure square feet. You can't measure price.
I had a 10,000 square foot office in Bellingham, Washington. I had the whole fourth floor of the Pacific Meridian building. The building was 40,000 square feet, but I didn't own the building. We were renting out 10,000 square feet. But if I owned the building, I said, well, my office is 40,000 square feet. That's within the margin of error. And so the thing is, this whole concept, and Trump owned the building. So he goes, so he added more square footage and may have been non-rentable at the time. The real problem we had in this case, which is a complete fraud, it's a summary judgment by a judge, and not all the facts were ever brought out. He looked at the facts real quickly and said that.
There are no new facts.
Now, Sasha,
Nobody, even Trump,
okay, Sasha, you
he
hate
cannot
Trump. He's
produce
guilty when
any
he
new
shows
facts.
up.
There are
My
none.
wife hates Trump. He's guilty when he shows up. Okay, I've seen the anti-Trumpers. My wife is a big anti-Trumper. He's guilty when he shows up. It doesn't matter what the facts are. Okay, if you're a good lawyer, you look at the facts first. This whole trial, as it sits today, Trump is right. It's a fraud. Now, with that, do I want him as president? Absolutely not. Same reason I don't want Biden. These people are old hat. Get rid of them. Get some new blood in. But at the same time, this whole thing is trumped up, and sure he shows up to that. And by the way, I saw his valuation at Mar-a-Lago, $740 million. You're going like, whoa, that's pretty high. It's pretty high for that piece of property he bought for $8 million. By the way, I was there when he bought it. But I lived in Palm Beach County. But at the same time, you can see also on the high-end valuation, the artwork that was placed in, the name that was placed, and all this other garbage. And I mean, frankly, the inflation of real estate around here. There's a house next door for me that they want $750,000. I don't think it's worth 350. But the thing is, it doesn't matter what I think. It's what they can get. If he gets it, becomes some sheik from Saudi Arabia, goes, hey, I'll spend $700 million on it. Fine. This valuation thing is real tough. And the estate planning attorney for 17 years, I represented the founders of Coca-Cola, the president of Bausch & Lomb, the president of Kimberly-Clark, the founder of Dunkin' Donuts. And let me tell you, the valuations of their closely held property and real estate is really tough. You can go read all the estate files out
This
there.
is one of the issues that happened with Joe Biden, saying that he wanted companies not to have two different books, one that was presented to shareholders and one that was presented to the tax office. But the thing is,
That's
people
always
think
happened that way.
that's right, but people think that's
is
because
absolutely insane. How stupid can somebody say that the thing is there's two different valuations? There's the tax valuation,
well,
and then there's the
okay,
valuation.
but the problem with that in relation to big companies doing it is people think that that's because they're being dishonest. They're not. Oftentimes, things are valued differently depending on what you're doing. And one of the reasons why taxation valuations are going to be different is because some assets and some things are written off at a faster rate or devalue at a faster rate based on the schedule that was prepared by government for those assets, whereas the effective life of that asset might be a much longer period of time. So you're presenting the same data, but you're presenting it in different ways to different groups. And even within a company, you will find that there are different reports based on who the manager is and what information they need to act on. So I'm not sure why this becomes such a big deal, other than to make it look like there's a group of people that are running off with all the money and leaving everyone else poorer. But that's just not the case in a lot of these situations.
Shaquille, look at the spreads on closely held companies. Like I look at mine, and I have a low valuation, high valuation, and it's 10 times greater. But even look at publicly traded stocks. I'll go in and buy a stock, and then in 3 months, I'll turn it with a 25% profit. I'm going like, wait a minute. Are you telling me that stock is worth 25% more than it was when I bought it in 3 months? Are you serious? Somebody has a valuation problem. But then when I sell it, this thing that gripes me, and I tell Sasha about it, it would continue going up. And I'm going like, how can it be worth that much?
But where does anything stop though? If we're complaining that a valuation that was accepted by a bank, that valuation was fraudulent, and just take Trump out of the equation, if that's the complaint in any situation, that's what would happen if Debbie says, I'm going to write another book, and I'm an accomplished author now. I've already written one, and I believe I'm going to be the next New York Times bestseller. And I say, all right, Debbie, I'm going to back you. Here's a check for $500,000. I'm going to bankroll you because I really believe in your book. And then if it doesn't become a New York bestseller, can I then ask for Debbie to be up on fraud charges because she misrepresented the value of her future book? I mean, if I'm prepared to accept that valuation, and especially if I'm a book publisher, which I'm not, but if I was, like, it's up to me to accept that valuation or not. It's not like the allegation with Donald Trump. It's not like he's being accused of going to, small mum and dad investors. He's being accused of using these assets as collateral for loans with some of the biggest banks in the country or the world. These banks have risk departments and valuation departments. Yeah, so I'm not really sure. What's happening here. And I will say this: I feel like they're doing themselves a bit of a disservice because it is making him a bit stronger in the eyes of a lot of people who are unhappy with the Biden administration. But also, Donald Trump's not really necessarily doing themselves any favors legally, because when he comes out and says, no, the valuation is this, the valuation is that, all those statements that he's giving after he's coming out of court, they can all be used against him later. So, I mean, as you well know, Nick, normally the advice to a client is be quiet, shut up, don't say anything. But Donald Trump's not capable of that, unfortunately. So
he's a horrible client for a lawyer. And if you look at his lawyers, like he hired this guy, Michael Cohen. Okay, if you go, now he's been disbarred. Michael Cohen, who was this big attorney. Yeah. He went to Thomas Cooley Law School. Everybody in the country knows Thomas Cooley is in like if not the last place, it's pretty close to it in law schools. In other words, you have to have the worst possible SAT with a horrible GPA, and God knows if any of them graduate from the bar. And so who did Trump hire as his attorney? Michael Cohen for the Thomas Cooley Law School. But I went through all his lawyers. he finds the worst lawyers in the world to hire who barely passed the bar from fourth-rated law school.
Well, this is what really surprised me. I mean, Sidney Powell, I don't know, this is something really weird about her, but this is what really surprised me with Rudy Giuliani, because, you know, he was the darling of New York after September 11. He was known all over the world as being, you know, being there when it all happened. And then, you know, he sort of faded away, and then he came back and sort of hitched his star to Donald Trump's wagon, and then continued to do so after the election was apparently lost. Even if I was to accept that they legitimately thought that they had a claim or a case, I'm not sure why you would want to fight that out for such a contentious precedent. I mean, how does that help you? And in the end, it looks like Donald Trump's going to throw him under the bus as well.
The problem is with Rudy is that he may have had alcohol and drug issues, and this is a real problem with the Florida bar. I don't know if people know that, because when I have to do my CLE and get approved, I have to take all these courses about mental and health and all that other stuff. I go, why is that? 25% of the members of the Florida bar, which now is 100,000 lawyers. When I was started, it was like 40,000. 100,000, 25% have alcohol and drug abuse issues. It's big. And so 25%, can you imagine, you go into a bar, I guess that's the reason they call it the bar. You go in a bar meeting with 100 lawyers, 25 of them are strung out on alcohol and drugs. It's really big. Now, Giuliani, if you go over a long period of time, it has effect on your body and your system. And so the thing is, the Giuliani of years ago could be totally different than the Giuliani today. And it's a big
well, that dye that ran down his head, and that, what did he do? He went to a garden center or something because they got the hotels wrong, or they did something at the. I mean, not a good look. But I will just say, in relation to drug and alcohol use, something that's not talked about very much, and the demographics may have changed slightly now, but they did a study before, and it was the financial centers of the world. So New York City, right in the financial district of London, financial district of many other countries around the world, had the highest rates of cocaine and alcohol use. Right. Yeah, and so it wouldn't surprise me that lawyers in New York who are going to be involved in those sorts of things are going to be.
Certain practices of law are very stressful, especially civil litigation and criminal litigation. So the thing is, if you're in litigation, you're in court all the time. It can be a very stressful practice. Even this case, I don't think they have a case, but what I think doesn't count is what the judge thinks or the appellate judge thinks. And every time Trump goes to court, his risk factor goes up, that he'll lose. You're not going to win all the cases. So who knows what's going to happen in terms of the judge's decision? I looking from afar, I don't think it's a case. But and it reeks with politics, because the plaintiff is the state of New York. It isn't a bank that was damaged because he didn't pay his mortgage, okay? Or it wasn't somebody who got damaged. And I really resent the state coming in and creating lawsuits. And I used to work for the city attorney.
But they do that anyway, Nick. If you're the victim of a crime, if somebody punches you in the face, it's not you who's the plaintiff, it's the state, as if they're somehow the victim that you got punched in the face. But I do want to say this, and I just want to get a response from Debbie and Sasha and yourself on this one, and I think we should wrap up after that. But I was having a good laugh because, look, guys, you are America. We're allowed to laugh at you. We are your allies. We still love you. But all this stuff going on with Kevin McCarthy, we're getting the popcorn out. I'm looking forward to this show. And one of the things that was proposed by Sean Hannity and a few others is, why don't they put Donald Trump in as Speaker of the House? So we were talking about that today, just us Australian guys just going, wow, that'd be really quite something to watch. It may not be fun for you guys to go through, but for the rest of us around the world that watch all of this, it'd be really interesting to watch. What do you guys think? I know that Jim Jordan is being proposed as well as a potential speaker. I think he's a little bit too outspoken and far on the right to be the speaker. It'd be like putting Ted Cruz there or something. But what do you think? Put Donald Trump there. He's got all of these criminal cases he has to deal with, 91 indictments, plus going into an election year. What do you think would happen because I honestly think that if he was offered it, he'd probably take it. He's egotistical. He would take it just for shits and giggles. So what do you guys think?
Wait a sec, Shaquille. You already said that although he wants to become the next president of the United States, but if he will be asked to become a speaker he will be happy to serve American people as a speaker. So everything is very simple. Here's the next.
Well, and that's why it's not that far a long shot, because you've got 45 days to avert the government shutdown. Putting him in there means that he can start to drive his policies now. And if there's anything positive that happens in this next year before the election, he can put his hand up and say, well, see, it was me. It wasn't Biden, it was me. Look at all the great things that happened since I was the speaker. That's why I should be the president. I mean, he'd certainly take it.
He's not in office, so it's not even an option.
I was under the impression, Debbie, that you didn't have to be in the House of Representatives in the United States to be elected speaker.
No.
That's possible. I don't know the rules.
He could be speaker and not be a member of the House. So this could happen, but they've already talked to me. Already turned it down because he wants to focus on being, quote, president. But when I saw Trump get elected, when I saw Pennsylvania fall and Hillary fall, my wife asked, what's going to happen? I said one thing: the circus will come to the town. Okay. And you know what? 4 years of Trump, that's what it was. The circus came to town. And every time he hangs out as president, and the media covers him, because I wish the Democrats wouldn't sue him. Just leave the guy alone. Let him die in media. Okay. The circus keeps coming back to town. And one commentator on media said, you know what? He's getting free advertisement because these lawsuits every day. You don't hear from the other candidates. What about Nikki Haley? I think it's a very reasonable candidate, the person I would vote for, and I'd switch sides to vote for her. She gets no press at all because she's not being sued. She's not a circus.
Well, but look at that last Republican debate.
Get elected.
Look at that last Republican debate. I mean, Chris Christie is right. At some point, Donald Trump should be on the stage, but look at that last debate. That was, honestly, I was embarrassed. It's not even for my party or my country, but I was embarrassed for them. I just thought it was so hopeless. It certainly wasn't, inspiring or anything like that. That must have been such a turnoff to anybody who wasn't already a Republican who was considering it. That would be such a turnoff. I would have thought.
I mean, when the guy that didn't show up, who has more votes, at least does better in the poll than all of us combined, then why bother to listen to those other people? They've basically been shut out by their own party. So they're going to push Trump through unless something drastic happens. And the Democrats can push Biden through, and the people get to suffer through.
That's assuming that Biden makes it through to the finish line. And I don't say this because I dislike Biden. I don't. I think he's probably a very nice person. I've obviously never met the man, but he reminds me of older people in my family that have passed away, and how they started, acting and struggling to keep up with words and things like that. I'm not confident that he'll actually make it all the way through to the next election. And if he did, I really wouldn't have a lot of confidence that he'd actually make it through a whole term. And I think that that's probably the predominant view in the United States, from what I'm hearing, is that most people on both sides of the aisle are very concerned about his health and his age. So,
which goes back to the succession problem that you have in these politicians. They refuse to give up power and empower the younger generation. So if the Democrats lose, which I think they will, there's only one group of people they can give fault to, and that's them. In other words, they met the enemy. It's them. And so,
but even if the Democrats were to hang on to the presidency, I think that they would be likely to suffer some significant losses in the House. And I'm not really sure about the Senate makeup at the moment, but they potentially could lose the Senate as well. But certainly their lead in the House would become a lot bigger, I would think. But I'll just leave with this note.
With the Speaker McCartney, do you think that the Republicans have any chance to continue to control the House after next election? I have no chance.
Yeah, I do, and I'll tell you why. Because
clearly the Republicans, they cannot govern. They can get elected here and there. They cannot govern, period. And it's going on now for 40 plus years, and they will never be in a position to govern because they have too large egos and they will destroy themselves.
We can talk about that.
Well, I think because of the House makeup and what seats are up, they'll probably increase their lead. That's why, nothing to do with the current system.
I got a wrap-up sign from Mark, so we're going to wrap up, and we'll see everybody tomorrow on World Edition, World Politics tonight. And bye-bye.